Hello friends and enemies, welcome to or back to Happy for Now. It's me Isabel here with a recommendation video that I was surprised I had enough books for, but I do. Rec list that is a thing we don't talk about enough. I am a big fan of sex scenes in my books, okay? I like that a lot. But that doesn't mean I don't also read books that don't heavily feature them, aren't fade to black, closed door-ish, maybe the door is cracked open, you know, and we see a little bit of build up. We get a little bit, but it's not just all over the page. Obviously I can do an opposite video where I rec like the filthiest things, right? But this is more of our books for people who maybe don't always want to read something explicit on page, which there's no shame in. Like, these actions on page should move the story forward to an extent. They should never make you feel like it's just there always. There are romance books that do that. That it's just like there's lots of sex to have sex, right? But there's a mix. There's a balance here. And this is like the other end. So as a not expert in these kinds of books, this list will feature books that range from closed door to like the door is cracked open, some things happen on page. So don't like come after me if you're like, this book is way spicier than you're saying it is, because this is all subjective. But all of these are books that if like we use the pepper scale, so to speak, I would put it at like max of 1 to 1.5 peppers, okay? Like, these are not super smutty, steamy books. These are going to be reads you can read around your family, your kids, and maybe they're not going to embarrass you too much. But these are the last 5 of these that I have personally enjoyed quite a bit. And some of these might surprise you. I know they kind of surprised me, but like not in a bad way. So first up, we have If the Shoe Fits by Julie Murphy. This is a fantastic Cinderella retelling. It follows our female main character on a game show type dating show situation. And our hero, they actually meet before the show on a plane. And then lo and behold, she ends up competing in this dating show with him. It follows her journey of being a designer, like into fashion and stuff, being plus size. This was really good. This was the first one in the Disney Presents adult romances that they did that I read, and I loved this book. I do want to finish the rest of the series, and these are of course fade to black because they're Disney. It's not a surprise, but this is obviously Cinderella inspired, and it was really good, really fun. I didn't miss the fact that there was no like direct intimacy on page like that. At most we had some kisses, and I was good with that. And I really liked how the dating show stuff played into this because that's normally not my favorite thing. So highly, highly recommend if you haven't checked this one out. This is the only one in that series I've read so far, though. I do need to note that. So they may not hold up the rest of them. I don't know. But I know this one is fade to black, completely closed door. Pretty. Okay, next we have Cinderella by S.T. Lin. This is a series of retellings that feature, I believe, all trans characters. The first one is fantastic, sapphic Cinderella situation. I loved it. It was so fun to read, to experience. I had a blast. I picked this up for free during one of the free book promotions. It's technically YA, but obviously that means, as it should be, there is nothing on page. And I really enjoyed it. Like, it was a really fun read. So it's one that I highly recommend if you're just looking for a fun retelling that is nothing on page. Next are going to be books that I consider pretty low on the spice scale. That does not mean there is no spice, but it does mean that I would consider it pretty low spice. It's not, you know, there might be a mix of fade to black. I just don't think it's a book I would ever deem as like, wow, that was spicy. That does not mean the scenes weren't good that were there. It just isn't nonstop boating, so to speak. So first up we have Heart Haunt Havoc by Freydis Moon. I love this book. This is basically about a haunted house and someone who's being haunted and the ghost hunter person who comes to help them. This is another trans romance, which is fantastic. It's so good. I loved this book. It is so fun. I need to finish this trilogy out sooner than later. This had, the author compares it to A Dowry of Blood. If you've read that, I love that book. But to me, again, another book that I don't deem spicy. Like, it's very low on my radar. They also call it with some fade to black. So again, you're going to have some build up here. Some things happen on page, but it fades to black. There's not a lot of like on page full on sex scenes happening here. Also, I read this after I read a different one by Freydis Moon and was like, wait, what? This is not near as hot as the other one I read. Again, not nearly as hot or spicy as the other book I read by them that I adored as well. Beyond the point. This one I think is a great entry point to their writing as well if you want to try it and you're unsure and you also want something that's a little lower on the heat scale. That I think is a great option. And again, I don't feel like it's too scary overall or too horror. Like, it's like gothic horror. So generally speaking, I feel like it's pretty approachable horror, at least for me as a horror baby. It's definitely one that I think is a good option to check out. Then we have Not My Type by Evie Mitchell. I loved this book. It was so fun. But for a book about someone who is a rigger and does rope bondage stuff, or shibari, I thought this book was going to be a lot spicier than it was. And I loved this book. Honestly, I don't even remember much of that. Like, I remember other things in this book more than I remember the sex scenes. So it cannot have been that spicy, which is why I stick it here. And that's okay. Like, I'm totally okay with that. But again, you would think for what the podcast, like what her podcast is about and the setup for this book, that it would have been a lot more open door than it was. And it's not. Which is okay. Again, that's not a bad thing. This is a really great romance, so if you've not picked this up yet, I really can't recommend it enough. I really had a fun time reading Not My Type. But yeah, this book is so fun because she kind of explores a thing she didn't think she could do or would enjoy with her disability. Our hero is so sweet and amazing. I loved him in this book. He was everything. I also really liked our heroine. She's a sexologist. She's has a whole podcast about making sex approachable and kind of demystifying sex, which is what I think is the fun parallel to this book, to me not being that spicy, is that she does this as a podcast and we don't really get a ton of stuff on page. I just double checked. I think there's 2 sex scenes total with penetration in this book. It's very low spice. Like, I think this is a book that like you very easily could read to like introduce yourself to maybe a little more things on page if you're interested in trying that, but also a book that isn't going to overrun you with it. Considering the topics in this book. Like, I feel like that it makes it work really well. Okay, last but by no means least is Canadian Boyfriend by Jenny Holiday. This is a book that I just read recently and walked away being like, okay. Again, another one that has some stuff on page that fades out to black pretty regularly. The sex in this book, I believe, adds a lot to the story and to the connection and builds us through this friends to lovers situation friends to lovers, we'll call it. This follows our heroine, Aurora, or Rory, who went to become a ballet prodigy or whatever, do ballet stuff. She goes to New York, she did all these schoolings, all this fancy stuff. And she ended up then coming back home because it just wasn't what she wanted. She's left this with a big eating disorder, and Mike is a recent widow within the last year with a daughter, Olivia, who's like 11, and he's just trying to figure out life without his wife, who made everything run smoothly. He's learning about emotional labor. He's learning what that means, and it's their very slow relationship build from her being kind of a nanny live-in person to boning, to, oh no, we can't do this, to, we're doing this. One thing, caveat for the setup, is the reason it's called Canadian Boyfriend, and he's not fake, he's Canadian on the cover, is that in high school, Rory met Mike, and they didn't know, she thinks it's him, but she doesn't know for sure at the time when they meet again, when she was working at a Caribou Coffee, and started writing like fake diary entries to him basically, and pretending she had a Canadian boyfriend to have less of the loneliness of high school because everyone thought she was a snob because of her dance stuff. So we follow that. This was a book in which I felt like you could see how their intimacy moved the plot forward, and you could also see how their intimacy developed as they kept getting together and things changed and grew with them as a unit in the best ways possible. So I really, really loved this book. I think this is a really good book. I was surprised at how much I liked it because I saw a lot of mixed reviews when it came out. And I also was surprised at how little I felt like there was in it as far as sex scenes and it being spicy. This is one that I think is a great option as well. Like I said, if you're trying to push your limits a little bit more, read some things that maybe you are a little uncomfortable with perhaps, or you just want a book that's not low stakes, but maybe has a little less to it in that department. Because like sometimes you just want to read a book that's low heat. And this fits perfectly. This does culminate pretty well at the end. The way it all plays out worked for me. I was nervous because that initial setup is a lot, to be honest. And that initial setup is stressful, in my opinion. So I was like kind of stressed the whole time. But then everything worked out good and I was like, okay, we're good. I'm fine. I'm glad I read this. So that's where we're at. Those are all of my low spice, fade to black, closed crack door mixture of recommendations for you. Again, these are what I consider low spice, which is not going to be the same as everyone's definition. But if there's only one or two like full-blown sex scenes, like that is a low spice book in my opinion. Again, you can disagree with me in the comments. That's fine. I don't care. We can fight about it. These are some of those books that I've read that have that and I've really enjoyed still. because not everything has to be super spicy to be enjoyable, and I'm not always there for that in my stories. But I would love to know your favorite recs, if there's one you think I should check out. Again, this is not my normal jam, so like, it's gotta be, you gotta sell me on it, okay? But I would love to hear what recommendations you have for this. And if you don't want to do that, you can leave me a single pepper emoji in the comments, of course, because that's what all of these books are to me. They're either 0 or 1 pepper. So I'll have links to all these books for you down below. Links to be my friend anywhere on the internet. I will talk to y'all in just a few days. Bye.
About to leave, already packing. Come with me. I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get